Enduring a bleak existence, she suffers relentless verbal abuse from the very maids and servants of her household. Trapped in a grey life, she remains completely ignored by the count she was married off to. Yet strangely, her heart remains sunk deep down, devoid of any anger or sadness. She lowers her head in quiet resignation as the weight of her hollow reality presses upon her. Questioning her tragic fate, she wonders how things ended up like this and what she truly is. Gazing forward with a sudden spark of realization, she begins to uncover who the real her is. Suddenly, a sharp voice calls out to Sister Ram, shattering her internal monologue. Ram visibly flinches, her green eyes widening in sudden anxiety as she braces for the inevitable torment. Feigning sympathy, her sisters crowd around the poor thing, mockingly asking if her wounds are from their mother or father. Dropping the act, they cruelly declare that dealing with Ram's troubles every single day makes their parents the true victims. This is 20-year-old Ram Ivoire, the eldest daughter of the Ivoire family, a former commoner baronial house. Viewed as a burden, she has been considered sickly and utterly useless since the day she was born. Confined to the manor as a dyed-in-the-wool ignoramus, she is deemed completely unable to find a marriage partner. Branded as plain, gloomy, timid, and groveling, she is despised as the Ivoire family's ultimate bad debt. Her sisters aggressively mock her weird green hair and sullen face, questioning why someone so different is their elder sister. Closing her eyes in silent defeat, Ram internally accepts that everything her cruel sisters say is entirely true. While normal people would lament and grieve this situation, everyone simply brands her weak-willed and cowardly for never fighting back. Paralyzed by apathy, she confesses she doesn't know what to do because, for some unfathomable reason, her heart simply doesn't stir. She endures a torturous routine where her parents and sisters fiercely berate her every single day. Her mother maliciously strikes her in places hidden by clothes, while her father violently hurls harsh words and throws objects. Isolated and neglected, she wears only hand-me-down clothes and is forced to eat her meals entirely separately. She wistfully imagines that gaining her parents' love and dressing up prettily, just like her sisters do, would be wonderful things. However, deep within her soul, she harbors a secret realization that she possesses something far more important. Her introspective trance is abruptly shattered as a sister leans in closely, menacingly calling her name. Her sister viciously scolds her for daydreaming alone and failing to listen properly, mocking her as a useless slowpoke. Trembling under their cruel amusement as they declare her pathetic state perfect, Ram can only stammer a fearful apology. A sudden gasp escapes her lips as one of the sisters arrogantly flicks something toward her face. Brushing imaginary dust off her own shoulder in absolute disgust, the sister physically recoils from Ram's presence. Demanding they leave immediately, Rim scathingly reminds Ram that she has absolutely no right to touch them without permission. Slamming the door behind them, they hurl one final insult mocking her for all her supposedly useless magical power. In this world, those without magic deeply fear and loathe anyone born with strange abilities, branding them as magical power holders. Despite her wretched standing, Ram silently acknowledges the truth that she is one of those incredibly rare magic holders herself. Cupping her hands, she manifests her ability, noting solemnly that her magic can only conjure a tiny, insignificant flame. Gazing at the pathetic spark, she laments that such useless power serves no purpose other than adding another reason to be loathed. Yet, as the tiny light dances upon her palm, a hidden part of her soul finds the gentle glow undeniably beautiful. The painful echoes of her family screaming at her to stay away because her magical power makes her creepy flood her mind. Their vicious words loop endlessly in her head, reinforcing the brutal notion that her seemingly useless power serves absolutely no purpose. Internalizing the decades of relentless abuse, Ram firmly believes that she is utterly useless for everything. Suddenly, her beaming parents burst in, gleefully announcing that her marriage has been decided and she can finally be useful to the family. Seizing her forcefully, her father declares she will conveniently become the second wife of Count Mercure, whose only condition for a bride is being a magic holder. Utterly bewildered by the sudden proclamation, Ram questions the shocking reality of her arranged marriage. Overwhelmed by a whirlwind of confusion, she struggles to process whether this dazzling news should bring her any joy. Her bewildered sisters furiously demand to know why a worthless girl like Ram gets to marry into a high-ranking family. Their mother smugly intervenes, reminding the jealous siblings of the Count's strict conditions for selecting a bride. Scoffing at the arrangement, The sisters mock the creepy Mercure household where strange magic holders gather. The parents ruthlessly celebrate the massive fortune they acquired by selling off their supposedly good-for-nothing daughter. Her father proudly boasts about his strenuous efforts in manipulating the magical requirements to ship Ram away. Ignoring swarms of eligible noblewomen, the grieving count coldly rejected anyone lacking magical abilities. Seeking only to fulfill his noble duties, the count demands nothing more than a docile and entirely powerless wife in name only. The vicious family eagerly concludes that Ram will serve as nothing more than a pathetic decoration in her new home. Showering her other daughters with affection, the cruel mother promises them loving families when their turn to marry arrives. Resigning herself to her grim fate, Ram silently accepts that a warm engagement was always impossible for someone so profoundly flawed. Her mother delivers a final, chilling order to obey the count quietly and absolutely no matter what happens. She must remain completely subservient and accept her mistreatment in this new life just like she always has. Jeering at her departure, her siblings sneer that groveling is the absolute only skill she possesses. Their vicious taunts brand her as weak-willed and cowardly as she departs for her uncertain future. A heavy silence descends as she begins her journey toward a dark and unfamiliar destiny. Looming ominously in the distance stands the nation's only isolated residence exclusively housing mages. Stepping onto the haunting estate, Ram faces the mysterious Count Mercure family where magic dictates every generation. Whispers echo through the halls as servants mockingly note the master's convenient absence on the very day his new wife arrives. Ram recalls the fleeting, painfully awkward meeting with her elusive husband where barely a single word was exchanged. Escorted to an isolated chamber deep within the massive mansion, she trembles under the crushing weight of her new reality. Paralyzed by her lack of proper education, the new mistress cowers in her room with absolutely no idea what to do. Desperately wanting to prove herself useful, she resolves to find some way to contribute to the intimidating Mercure estate. Venturing tentatively into the grand halls, her timid attempts to understand her new home begin. The oppressive atmosphere of the mansion threatens to swallow her whole as she encounters the estate's strict hierarchy. The arrogant head maid, secretly harboring deep admiration for the count, glares at Ram with naked, terrifying hostility. Spitting venom at the commoner-born bride, the head maid aggressively orders Ram to never leave her room without permission. Following their cruel leader, the entire household staff quickly unites to subject the helpless mistress to relentless daily bullying. Starved and humiliated, Ram silently endures as the cruel maids intentionally serve her nothing but a pathetic scrap of bread. Shivering violently in freezing water, she forces a smile while the wicked servants mock her pale complexion. Completely abandoned by her indifferent husband, Ram is left entirely to the mercy of her abusers. Gazing into the gloomy shadows of her chamber, she heartbreakingly accepts that her miserable existence remains exactly the same. The ghostly memory of the count fades entirely as days bleed into weeks without a single glimpse of her husband. Trapped in isolation, she wonders desperately if the count is completely oblivious to her torment or simply ignoring her suffering. Stripped of her will to fight back, Ram realizes with chilling clarity that she cannot even muster an ounce of anger toward her abusers. Sinking deeper into the suffocating despair, her hollow eyes reflect a soul whose heart has completely fallen asleep. Gazing blankly at the void, she whispers a quiet, heartbreaking plea as she questions the meaning of her endless suffering. Vicious gossip echoes through the corridors as maids mercilessly mock her exceptionally pathetic magical abilities. The ultimate insult strikes like a blade as the servants ruthlessly question why this bedridden, ignored girl ever married into their proud family. Cornered in the shadowy halls, Ram stands frozen as the malicious maids slowly close in around her. Smirking with fake politeness, the cruel servants condescendingly remind their mistress of their supposed loyalty. Ram gasps in sudden surprise as the maids pivot the conversation toward her magical abilities. A vicious maid steps forward, arrogantly chastising Ram for failing to properly understand her own powers. Mocking her noble title, the servants eagerly demand a grand display of the wonderful magic that earned her the rank of Countess. They sneer mercilessly, challenging her to exhibit power befitting the bride of Lord Charles, the strongest mage in history. Lowering her head in defeat, Ram softly murmurs her understanding as the cruel trap firmly closes around her. Trembling as she prepares her spell, she desperately hopes this pathetic display will finally satisfy their torment. She painfully realizes the maids already know she can only cast one single, insignificant spell. Focusing her meager energy, Ram summons a tiny, flickering spark of flame from her fingertips. Cruel laughter immediately erupts through the stone corridors as the maids loudly mock her pathetic display. Scornfully dismissing her magic, one servant snickers that a common candle would be far more useful. Ram's tiny flame fizzles out, plunging her back into the cold reality of her absolute humiliation. Devastated by the brutal comparison to the previous mistress, she internalizes the utter worthlessness of her existence. The head maid suddenly bursts into the room, excitedly announcing that the master will soon return to the mansion. Flashing a deeply malicious grin, the head maid declares she has wonderful news for the pathetic countess today. Ram stares up in trembling confusion, helplessly bracing herself for whatever cruel scheme comes next. Looming ominously over her fragile mistress, the head maid aggressively demands Ram's complete attention. In a shocking display of audacity, she orders Ram to suggest to the master that he take her as his concubine. Viciously tearing into Ram's insecurities, the head maid insists a weak and useless wife must at least introduce a woman capable of bearing an heir. Completely overwhelmed by the ruthless demand, Ram stammers helplessly without forming a single coherent word. The head maid sneers with pure disgust, branding Ram as utterly useless with only pathetic magic to her name. Relentlessly driving the knife deeper, she demands to know if a dull, ignored woman like Ram feels ashamed to even call herself countess. Snarling with unbridled hatred, the head maid violently declares that merely looking at Ram infuriates her. Without warning, the vicious servant violently shoves the fragile countess backward toward the steep stone staircase. Ram tumbles helplessly through the air, her tiny body completely surrendering to gravity's merciless pull. She crashes brutally onto the hard floor, the violent impact sending agonizing shockwaves through her spine. Crumpled pitifully at the bottom of the stairs, she questions in deep despair why she is completely incapable of doing anything. Writhing in sheer agony, she blames the excruciating pain on the harsh reality that she is simply useless Ram. As a splitting headache ravages her skull, she cries out in pain, condemning herself as weak-willed and cowardly. Suddenly, an intense, blinding flash of magical energy violently erupts from deep within her fractured consciousness. Pausing the endless cycle of self-hatred, a powerful inner voice suddenly demands to know if her weakness is truly reality. Shattering the suffocating illusion of her pathetic existence, she decisively rejects the lie with a single word. A fierce, brilliant light violently pierces through the dense darkness of her completely suppressed mind. Clutching her throbbing head, she realizes with stunning clarity that her current miserable persona is completely false. Suppressed memories flood back like a massive tidal wave, instantly washing away the fabricated weakness that bound her. A determined, wildly confident smirk creeps across her bruised face as her true dormant power begins to awaken. Opening her newly fierce eyes, she finally remembers the incredible truth that was forcefully stolen from her. Rising from the cold floor with a newfound fiery intensity, she fully embraces her newly awakened self. Glaring forward with terrifying resolve, she proudly declares that she was never some weak-willed countess. The scene instantly shifts to a grand estate where a formidable presence boldly arrives to assert dominance. A powerful figure strides forward with immense authority as the local villagers gather in absolute awe. Bowing deeply in overwhelming gratitude, the locals aggressively shower their noble savior with massive thanks. They express utter disbelief that Count Mercure himself arrived personally to annihilate every magical beast in their territory. Waving off their desperate dinner invitations, the Count stoically demands to know his next objective. An eager nobleman shamelessly attempts to present his daughters to the immensely powerful mage. Annoyed by the endless marriage propositions, the Count silently curses taking a useless wife just to deflect these exact annoyances. Exhausted from his magical combat duties, he laments the towering pile of administrative work awaiting him as head of the household. His aide chuckles at his feigned annoyance, playfully suggesting he should have accepted the lavish hospitality since his daily schedule finally cleared. Gazing toward the distant horizon, the Count firmly resolves to return to his actual home. Watching his master depart, the aide sincerely hopes that the famously unstoppable Lord Charles can finally find a moment of peace. Meanwhile, deep within the gloomy mansion, an explosive shift in consciousness abruptly rewrites reality. Glaring with piercing intensity, Ram fiercely declares she is no longer the pathetic, timid countess she once was. Rejecting her wretched past, she completely discards the miserable version of herself that crawled helplessly on the floor. A massive surge of hidden magical energy violently erupts as the ultimate truth of her existence finally unlocks. Embracing her incredible destiny, she fearlessly acknowledges her true, terrifying identity. She remembers she is Aurora Vulsis, the legendary and absolute strongest archmage whose mythical tales still echo after 500 years. Standing tall with supreme confidence, she accepts that she is the direct reincarnation of that legendary magical titan. Shedding decades of weakness, she basks in the glorious sensation of finally awakening from an endlessly long slumber. Pure, unadulterated mana explosively surges through every single vein from the top of her head straight down to her toes. Realizing the immense power she desperately craved was locked inside her soul all along, a triumphant smirk crosses her face. Clenching her fists with overwhelming authority, she completely reclaims both her godly power and her lost historical memories. Radiating absolute dominance, she aggressively vows to never again live as that disgustingly timid weakling. Shifting her piercing gaze toward her abuser, she coldly calls out to prepare her first act of vicious retribution. Unaware of the danger, the wicked head maid sneers, mocking Ram and asking if the fall completely shattered her fragile mind. Looking down at her pathetic tormentor, Ram contemplates exactly how to punish the ringleader of her daily abuse. Exuding terrifying calm, Ram blatantly warns the arrogant servant to beg for forgiveness while she still breathes. Utterly bewildered by this sudden defiance, the head maid stammers in absolute confusion. Quickly regaining her furious arrogance, the servant aggressively lashes out, demanding to know what the useless girl is blabbering about. Lunging forward to strike, the head maid violently declares that the pathetic Countess desperately needs a brutal lesson in discipline. Moving with blinding speed, Ram intercepts the attack, ruthlessly stating that the head maid is the one lacking proper discipline. In a flash of brutal vengeance, Ram completely obliterates the maid's arrogance with a devastatingly powerful backhand strike. Watching the woman brutally crash into the stone wall, Ram nonchalantly realizes she accidentally overdid the simple slap. Reflecting on her past, she acknowledges that the old Ram was pathetically weak and hopelessly waiting for a convenient savior. Grounding her stance with absolute power, she fiercely asserts that true change only begins by standing on her own 2 feet. Dismissing her years of torment, she coldly declares that she absolutely refuses to serve as anyone's helpless punching bag. Sighing at the pathetic heap on the floor, she fully embraces her supreme identity, completely unbothered by striking such a trivial insect. The tyrannical head maid lays completely crushed and utterly humiliated upon the cold stone floor. Looking at the pathetic servant, Ram feels genuine disgust that she ever allowed such a weak woman to bully her. Surveying the chaotic aftermath in the corridor, the legendary archmage smirks dangerously as her true revenge finally begins. Examining her filthy dress and the blood dripping from her head, Ram calmly notes that she hardly looks like a proper countess. Brimming with newly awakened confidence, she fearlessly declares that her current self can handle absolutely anything thrown her way. Channeling her perfect control over magic, she effortlessly heals her bloody injuries in the blink of an eye. She admits being completely clueless about the current era since the old Ram lived as an entirely ignorant shut-in. Formulating her strategy, she determines that gathering critical information is the absolute first step toward taking complete control of the estate. She cautiously decides against immediately revealing her true identity as the strongest archmage while plotting her initial actions. Wandering confidently through the lavish corridors, she peers around and wonders exactly where she is within the massive mansion. Suddenly, an arrogant steward intercepts her path, dramatically scolding the lady for daring to wander around. The condescending servant furiously complains that her aimless wandering creates entirely unnecessary work for the busy staff. Stepping into her personal space, the steward aggressively demands she return to her designated room immediately. Meeting his gaze with an icy glare, Ram coldly demands to know why the mistress requires a mere steward's permission to walk. Brushing off his pathetic objections, she firmly dismisses the steward by stating she absolutely does not need an escort. The panicked steward desperately threatens to report her to his lordship, screeching that she will face divorce and plunge her family into poverty. Utterly unfazed by the threat, Ram boldly dares him to inform both the lord and her family that they can go ahead and divorce her. The arrogant steward gasps in absolute shock, completely paralyzed by the historically timid countess's fierce and sudden defiance. She ruthlessly declares that she couldn't care less about a greedy family that sold her away just to line their own pockets. Enraged by her unprecedented insolence, the furious steward lunges forward to forcibly drag the mere lady back to her room. He aggressively seizes her fragile arm, foolishly attempting to physically dominate the newly awakened archmage. Glancing down at his pathetic grip, Ram casually considers simply shaking the insolent servant off her arm. Moving with ghostly grace, she effortlessly slips from his tight grasp and leaves the bewildered steward stumbling forward. The enraged steward screams that he has had enough, while Ram coldly reiterates that she has absolutely no intention of turning back. Screaming insults at the useless brat, the violent servant foolishly raises his hand to strike her across the face. Moving with blinding speed, Ram casually intercepts the attack and violently hurls the grown man straight over her shoulder. Watching the crushed steward writhe on the floor, Ram softly sighs and mutters about striking yet another completely trivial thing. She calmly assesses that her combat senses remain slightly dull since her legendary mana hasn't circulated in over 5 centuries. Stepping smoothly over the moaning servant, she decisively resolves to continue her exploration now that the loud nuisance has been silenced. The sharp, heavy clack of boots echoes ominously down the stone corridor as a massively intimidating presence rapidly approaches. A remarkably tall and imposing figure steps out of the dark shadows, radiating an aura of raw and terrifying magical authority. This deeply intimidating man is none other than Charles Mercure, the famously terrifying and absolute master of the Grand Estate. His cold, piercing eyes lock onto the chaotic scene, instantly analyzing his fallen steward and his supposedly helpless young wife. Charles stands formidably as the current Count Mercure, a man completely draped in dark elegance and carrying an aura of absolute supremacy. Known universally as a remarkably cold and cruel individual, he reigns as the strongest mage in the entire history of the Mercure family. Towering above the fallen servants, this terrifyingly powerful and legendary figure is none other than Ram's legally wedded husband. The bruised and humiliated steward desperately cries out to his lord, seeing the formidable count as his ultimate salvation. Scrambling pathetically to his knees, the bloody steward urgently prepares to spin a frantic web of lies to defend his violent actions. Charles listens in complete silence, his stony expression entirely unreadable as he glares down at the groveling servant. The terrified steward wildly accuses her ladyship of intentionally interfering with his vital duties before suddenly turning extremely violent. Completely ignoring the whining servant at her feet, Ram looks directly into her imposing husband's eyes and boldly welcomes him home. Caught slightly off guard by her uncharacteristically intense and fearless gaze, Charles casually acknowledges her completely unexpected presence. As the battered steward watches in complete disbelief, Charles coldly acknowledges her presence and her position as the Countess. Glaring down with intimidating authority, Charles coldly warns Ram not to cause any unnecessary trouble. Meeting his gaze fearlessly, Ram firmly states that she only shook off his rough steward and finds it pathetic to complain to the master over every little thing. Charles remains deadpan as he processes her uncharacteristically bold defiance in absolute silence. Refusing to intervene, Charles calmly retorts that managing the sprawling estate is fundamentally her job as the Countess. He smoothly adds that her noble duties naturally include appropriately disciplining the unruly servants however she sees fit. Ram blinks in slight surprise as she silently processes this incredibly unexpected shift in administrative authority. A sudden, highly confident spark ignites in her bright eyes as a brilliant realization washes over her completely. Tilting her head with a mysterious and knowing smirk, she softly questions the sheer scope of his command. She boldly asks if he is truly leaving the absolute management of the entire Grand Estate in her capable hands. Charles silently holds her piercing gaze without offering a single word of hesitation or stubborn denial. Flashing a radiant and wildly confident smile, Ram proudly declares that she shall absolutely do her best. Having entirely settled the matter, the imposing Count turns his back and begins walking heavily down the stone corridor. His heavy footsteps echo ominously as he departs from the chaotic scene without offering a single second glance. Standing tall among the defeated servants, Ram watches her intimidating husband disappear into the gloomy shadows. Time passes over the Grand Mercure estate as monumental changes begin to silently unfold within its ancient walls. Sitting quietly at his massive desk, Charles deeply ponders the incredibly strange and sudden shift in his previously timid wife. He notes that ever since he delegated the estate management, she has forcefully taken the initiative with truly terrifying efficiency. Reflecting on the sheer chaos, he realizes she mercilessly fired all her abusive maids and replaced a staggering 80% of the household staff. She even fiercely threatened the remaining servants with immediate expulsion if they ever dared to attempt anything suspicious. Baffled by this unprecedented purge, the legendary mage desperately wonders what on earth is actually happening in his own home. He logically questions if her initial timidity was a flawless act, as this ruthless behavior completely contradicts the cowering woman he originally married. While Charles debates whether to physically warn or silently observe her, an expected voice suddenly interrupts his deep thoughts. Stepping lightly into the study, his trusted aide Faye curiously asks the brooding master if something troublesome is the matter. Charles heavily sighs and frankly admits that his mounting confusion is entirely centered around his wildly unpredictable wife. Faye knowingly chuckles, easily deducing that the madam has clearly been fiercely devoting herself to managing the massive estate. The cheerful aide suggests leaving her be since she isn't causing trouble, happily noting that the daily meals have drastically improved since she replaced the terrible chef. Charles grudgingly concedes the culinary improvement but still harbors deep, unsettling suspicions about her sudden personality shift. Catching on to his master's lingering anxiety, a playfully mischievous expression quickly spreads across Faye's observant face. Faye smoothly suggests that despite the positive changes, it would still be incredibly wise to independently confirm her true intentions. Offering his highly specialized services, Faye eagerly volunteers to personally investigate the Countess since Charles is completely swamped with magical duties. Accepting the highly convenient offer, Charles firmly tasks Faye with the covert investigation and places his absolute total trust in the sly aide. Faye executes a flawless, theatrical bow as he gleefully accepts the clandestine mission to secretly observe the mysterious Ram. Meanwhile, deep inside her newly reclaimed private chambers, Ram stretches her arms wide with immense physical satisfaction. Basking in the warm morning sunlight, the reincarnated archmage relishes the glorious absolute freedom of her peaceful sanctuary. She joyfully cheers that she feels incredibly refreshed now that all the utterly useless and obnoxiously noisy maids are finally gone. She marvels at how completely effortless changing into complicated noble dresses becomes when heavily utilizing her flawless magical abilities. Gazing happily at her incredibly luxurious breakfast, she violently rejoices over firing the abusive cook who constantly fed her pathetic leftovers. Reflecting on her merciless physical purge of her abusers, she finds it absolutely unbelievable that her former pathetic self endured such torment without a single complaint. She groans dramatically while remembering the sheer, exhausting volume of corrupt servants and head maids she was forcefully required to physically dismiss. Flashing a dangerous smirk, she boldly decides that since she has completely conquered the estate's interior, the vast outside world is her next immediate target. Faye, the sharply dressed aide, stands formally in the grand estate's sunlit hallway. Bowing with practiced grace, he smoothly introduces himself as Faye, the trusted aide to the imposing Count Mercure. Greeting the newly empowered Madame Ram with a polite smile, he politely bids her a very good morning. Ram responds coolly, internally noting that this slick man is Charles' constant companion, before instructing him to state his business. Faye smoothly maintains his polite approach, standing perfectly calm before the formidable and watchful Countess. Mentioning her recent fierce dedication to managing the estate, he thoughtfully suggests she might soon desire to step outside the suffocating grounds. Glaring with sharp, unwavering suspicion, Ram bluntly demands to know if the Count ordered this man to watch her every move. Faye immediately deflects the harsh accusation, smoothly offering to guide her outside himself simply to provide helpful explanations. Maintaining her icy and unreadable demeanor, Ram decisively chooses to temporarily accept his highly convenient explanation. With a flawless smile, Faye gracefully dismisses her deep suspicions, insisting he only wishes to be of absolute service to his madam. Though Ram firmly decides she absolutely cannot trust him, she silently concedes that having a knowledgeable guide is incredibly convenient right now. Stepping forward into the grand, echoing corridor, the tense duo prepares to venture beyond the mansion's familiar walls. With an enthusiastic bow, Faye happily accepts her direct command to guide her into the outside world. As they walk, Ram surprisingly requests their first destination be the detached residence to formally check on Lord Cannon. Faye pauses slightly, fully acknowledging her completely unexpected request with a swift and polite affirmative. Ram bitterly reflects on how the cruel maids constantly blocked her from seeing the boy, always claiming the Count never granted permission. She clenches her fists in silent frustration, knowing she was entirely denied access even though the boy is legally her very own son. In truth, Canon is merely the Count's adopted son and shares absolutely no direct blood relation with the terrifying Charles. The original, fiercely timid Ram desperately loved children and constantly pleaded to see the young boy she cared for deeply. Heartbreakingly, her abusers constantly lied that Canon simply refused to see her, completely crushing her fragile spirit into total submission. Realizing that Faye seems completely unaware of this cruel, systematic isolation, Ram deduces that the denied access was just another form of brutal maid harassment. Arriving before a massive, intricately carved stone gate, Faye respectfully announces that they have finally reached their destination. Before them stands a sprawling, magnificent academy specifically built to house and train the estate's magical children. Faye expertly explains the towering structure's precise layout, noting the first floor handles rigorous lessons while the upper floors serve exclusively as dormitories. He elaborates that exactly 10 students between 6 and 15 currently reside there, with 15-year-old Canon proudly serving as the absolute eldest. Faye politely asks if he should explain the academy's true, underlying purpose, prompting an eager and commanding nod from the curious Archmage. Stepping into the dusty training grounds, Ram observes a massive, suspended rock heavily scarred by relentless magical target practice. Faye calmly details that talented children from across the entire country are gathered here through aggressive scouting or being outright sold by desperate parents. These incredibly rare children live closely together in the secluded academy while intensely learning to control and weaponize their volatile magical abilities. At 16, they graduate into various official posts or become instructors like Faye, but fundamentally remain the absolute, inescapable property of the Mercure family. He reveals that the single most exceptional student is instantly named the Count's adopted son, perfectly explaining why the highly promising Canon currently holds the prestigious title. Since the formidable head of the Mercure family faces incredibly dangerous combat duties, an heir must be urgently chosen based purely on raw magical ability rather than bloodline. Faye casually drops the massive bombshell that the terrifyingly powerful Lord Charles was also selected from this very academy through the exact same brutal meritocracy. Shocking Ram even further, Faye casually notes that even if she and Charles had a biological child, that child would never become heir unless they completely surpassed Canon's raw power. Absorbing this staggering revelation about the estate's ruthless survival of the fittest traditions, Ram softly murmurs her deep, calculating understanding. Internally, she rapidly pieces together historical records showing a massive, undeniable decline in both the overall status and birth rate of mages since her death 500 years ago. Finding this dramatic, global decrease highly suspicious, she fiercely refuses to accept it as natural since it completely contradicts the magically rich world she once commanded. The grim fact that only 10 magically talented students could be gathered from the entire sprawling nation severely deepens her growing, highly uneasy suspicions. Noticing her sudden, intense silence, Faye steps closer and politely asks if the wandering madam is feeling overwhelmed and fatigued. Snapping back to reality with a fierce, brilliant gleam in her eye, the reincarnated Archmage dismisses his concern and eagerly commands him to explain the current state of magic itself. Detailing the strict rules of this era, Faye explains that all magic users, including the Count, are strictly limited to just one of the 8 elemental attributes and a single spell. He smoothly reveals his own affinity for versatile wind magic while casually noting that Madame Ram utilizes light magic. Pondering this bizarre restriction, Ram internally notes that while the basic elements remain unchanged, possessing only one spell is utterly baffling. Approaching the classroom door, Faye points out that 3 older students, including Lord Canon, are currently occupied inside. Peering through the doorway without knocking, Ram gazes into the austere classroom where the estate's magical youth endure their rigorous lessons. Faye immediately offers to formally announce her arrival to the instructor, but Ram swiftly raises a hand to halt him. She firmly commands him to wait, expressing her sharp desire to simply observe their usual training without causing a disruptive interruption. Bowing respectfully to her demand, Faye slyly agrees that this presents a perfect opportunity for her to witness modern magical education firsthand. Stepping silently into the shadows, the legendary Archmage intensely scrutinizes the children gathered around their instructor. Scanning the gloomy, dimly lit room, she feels a pang of pity for the young children forcefully confined within such an oppressive environment. She grimly realizes that the vibrant, joyful freedom of magic from her past era has been completely eradicated by this cold modern system. Faye whispers that the current magical instructor is an academy graduate and a direct contemporary of his own generation. At the front of the class, the stern instructor aggressively barks orders, demanding absolute magical control from his struggling pupils. A young student grunts in sheer exertion as they desperately attempt to compress their volatile magical energy. Recognizing the fundamental exercise, Ram acknowledges they are practicing the difficult task of compressing and maintaining a fully powered spell. Watching their rigid and unimaginative efforts, she mentally dismisses the entire restrictive training method as incredibly dull. Questioning if this is truly the mainstream standard of modern magic, she bristles at how tragically limited their education has become. The instructor finally spots the intruders, spreading his arms in a dramatic welcome while questioning what brings the madam to his classroom. Addressing the room with a theatrical flourish, he insists there is absolutely no need for the Countess to hide in the doorway. Stepping fully into the light, Ram smoothly apologizes for the sudden intrusion while explaining she is touring the estate following her health recovery. Locking her piercing gaze onto a specific desk, she boldly declares that she came specifically to check on Canon today. The young Lord Canon turns slowly, his face twisted into a deeply hostile and unwelcoming glare. Meeting his cold stare, Ram softly murmurs to herself as she registers the sheer intensity of the boy's silent rejection. She logically concedes that appearing out of nowhere after months of perceived neglect must seem incredibly suspicious to her adopted son. Shifting her sharp gaze across the room, she quickly realizes that Canon's icy demeanor is completely shared by his peers. Every single student in the classroom locks onto her with intensely unpleasant and mocking stares. A chilling realization washes over her as she instantly recognizes the exact same dark malice that radiated from her abusive maids. Suddenly, a hostile student breaks the tense silence by aggressively demanding to see the madam's magical abilities. A second student immediately joins the cruel chorus, loudly shouting their eager desire to witness her supposedly grand power. The entire classroom erupts into a coordinated, mocking challenge specifically designed to humiliate the supposedly powerless Countess. Feigning polite exasperation, the smug instructor loudly sighs that everyone is simply overexcited by Madam's incredibly rare visit. Flashing a deeply malicious grin, the instructor smoothly asks if the Madam would be willing to show his eager students a proper magical example. Recognizing the exact same bullying tactics from the mansion, Ram mentally braces herself as the pathetic cycle of humiliation attempts to restart. She calculates that this arrogant instructor definitely knows about her supposedly meager power and fully intends to make a total fool of her. Utterly unfazed by his pathetic trap, Ram coolly accepts the bold challenge with an air of absolute, terrifying confidence. Stepping forward to the center of the hostile room, the reincarnated Archmage prepares to completely shatter their modern illusions. A dangerously calm smirk spreads across her face as centuries of dormant magical mastery begin to aggressively stir within her veins. She boldly declares that she will demonstrate a magical application utilizing the exact control and maintenance techniques they were just struggling with. Understanding that raw magical ability violently dictates the strict hierarchy of the Mercure family, she resolves to completely dominate the room. Glaring with the supreme authority of a legendary mage, she prepares to brutally teach them that true magic is far more than their trivial measurements. A tempest of magical energy swirls violently through the air as Charles fixes his intense, unwavering gaze forward. A radiant woman smiles serenely, declaring the incredible magical display to be truly enjoyable. The powerful magical energy continues to ripple outward in a mesmerizing and untamed spectacle. An observant man watches a glowing butterfly, noting how the space is governed by rolling magical illusions. A young girl stares in absolute wonder as magical clovers and tulips bloom brilliantly within the radiant light. Onlookers marvel at how such impossible feats can be accomplished simply by combining magic. The elegant woman casually explains she could have used grander magic from 500 years ago if they weren't indoors, asking if it was well received. Charles stands completely stunned as shimmering flower petals drift gently past his face. Sweating with sheer disbelief, Charles watches the beautiful magical petals fall helplessly around him. An awestruck spectator remarks that even they have never witnessed such large-scale magic performed so effortlessly. Overwhelmed by the stunning display, a young man breathlessly stammers out Lord Charles' name. A witness fervently declares that Madame is clearly no ordinary person. The crowd erupts into amazed cheers as a brilliant, sparkling rainbow suddenly materializes across the room. Someone eagerly looks forward to reporting this miraculous and unprecedented event. Later that night under a moonlit sky, a harsh voice abruptly shatters the silence. Charles pounds aggressively on the door, demanding she open it while questioning if she is inside. Disturbed at this hour, she coldly greets him and asks if there is some pressing matter. She internally doubts there is any particular topic to discuss for him to visit her room so late. Dismissing the intrusion as going nowhere, she is abruptly cut off when he firmly insists he has a reason. Claiming illness to retire for the night, she is startled when he violently forces the door open a few centimeters. Charles bursts through the doorway, bluntly stating that his demand is simple. Flashing a dangerous, confident smile, he commands her to immediately show him her magic. The estranged husband and wife sit in tense silence on opposite chairs across the dimly lit room. The heavy silence lingers for a moment following his bold demand to witness her magical abilities. She stews in quiet resentment, reflecting that neither her past nor present self truly knows this husband in name only. Radiating silent annoyance, she admits honestly to herself that she harbors no good feelings toward Charles. She furiously recalls how this man completely neglected her and left her under house arrest for their sham marriage. Disgusted by his selfish intrusion, she deduces that word of her academy magic has finally reached him. The sheer audacity of his imposing presence solidifies her deep and unwavering disdain for him. Forcing a polite smile, she feigns ignorance about her advanced magic while boiling with hidden anger. Charles demands she quickly show the academy magic, but she coldly fires back that she does not recall being ordered. Charles goes completely rigid, his eyes widening in blank, unblinking shock at her blatant defiance. He stares in utter disbelief, entirely unable to process his previously obedient wife's sudden and sharp rebellion. Recovering his composure, he firmly attempts to assert his authority by reminding her she is his wife. She playfully covers her mouth and giggles, completely unfazed by his pathetic attempt at dominance. She ruthlessly suggests he cut off her family's financial support immediately, as her objective in this unnecessary marriage is already complete. Instead of erupting in anger, Charles closes his eyes, clasps his hands, and lets out a soft, amused scoff. Her confident smile falters slightly into confusion as she completely fails to understand his surprisingly calm reaction. She internally panics, wondering why he is smiling when she purposefully said everything to make him despise her. Leaning in with an intense, calculated gaze, Charles smoothly reminds her that as her husband, he still takes care of her living expenses. A quiet tension settles over the dimly lit room as the estranged couple continues their intense standoff. Charles stares straight ahead in utter shock as the heavy weight of her accusations completely silences him. She fiercely demands to know if he meant the miserable house arrest with prison-like leftover meals or the cruel water training forced on her by his maids. Refusing to back down, she recounts the daily torment where the steward attacked her for amusement and the maids relentlessly demanded introductions to his mistress. She glares directly into his eyes and boldly declares that these horrendous living circumstances were exactly what he granted her as a husband. Judging from his visibly stunned reaction, Charles clearly knew absolutely nothing about the horrific treatment Ram endured within his own home. He simply stares blankly, having truly believed all this time that he was adequately fulfilling his duty as a supportive spouse. Sighing in exhaustion, she coldly states he would dislike a constantly complaining wife anyway, though his opinion no longer matters to her. Asserting her fierce independence, she confidently declares she can survive anywhere and directly demands that he grant her a divorce. A heavy, suffocating silence fills the quiet room as Charles slightly lowers his head to process her bold and unexpected request. Internally celebrating her flawless argument, she feels absolute certainty that the divorce is finally a decided matter. Breaking the overwhelming tension, Charles suddenly lets out a low, amused scoff as a dark smirk forms on his face. To her absolute bewilderment, Charles throws his head back and erupts into booming, uncontrollable laughter that echoes off the walls. Wiping a stray tear from his eye, he fixes her with a deeply intense and utterly captivated gaze. Leaning in closely, he confidently orders her not to hold back, revealing he never intended to divorce her from the very start. Ram freezes in absolute shock, her eyes widening as his unexpected and stubborn declaration completely shatters her carefully laid plans. Stammering in complete disbelief, she listens helplessly as he boldly claims that speaking with her has only strengthened his fiery resolve. He openly admits he completely misunderstood her, having never expected her to openly pick a fight with a man praised as the strongest in his family's history. Frowning in deep annoyance, she flatly corrects his arrogant assumption by stating she is merely stating facts rather than picking a fight. Smiling with undeniable intrigue, Charles proudly declares that Ram is far more interesting than he ever could have anticipated. Disgusted by his arrogant amusement, she calls him incredibly unpleasant and firmly demands he leave so she can finally sleep. Unfazed by her hostility, Charles patiently explains that noble divorces are incredibly difficult, especially since the Mercure family head requires the king's personal permission. Flashing a triumphant, authoritative smirk, he coldly commands her to completely give up on her foolish dream of divorce. Realizing the severe political trouble of facing the entire kingdom, she silently curses how ridiculously troublesome getting a divorce actually is. A heavy wave of exhaustion washes over her as she contemplates the daunting and seemingly impossible obstacles standing in her way. Softening her harsh glare, she suddenly remembers that little Canon might grieve deeply if he were to suddenly lose his mother. Even though they share no blood relation, she genuinely worries the sweet boy would be utterly heartbroken if she selfishly left on her own. Shaking her head firmly from side to side, she fiercely pushes the depressing thoughts away to refocus her fading determination. Letting out a highly frustrated sigh, she begrudgingly concedes to her husband that she will give up on the argument just for today. However, she immediately spins around and fires a fierce, defiant glare right back at his smug face. Slamming the door shut, she loudly proclaims she has absolutely no intention of ever withdrawing her ultimate desire to divorce him. Hearing his booming laughter echo from the hallway, she slumps against the heavy wooden door in total exhaustion and desperate need for sleep. The bright morning sun rises beautifully over the sprawling Mercure estate, signaling the start of a brand new day. Stepping outside into the fresh morning air, she stretches her arms high above her head to wake up her stiff muscles. Clenching her fists with renewed resolve, she mentally prepares herself for the intense physical exertion she desperately needs. She realizes with slight frustration that her body has grown quite dull and weak after such a long period of forced inactivity. Marching boldly into the Mercure family garden, she resolves to train her physical strength so she can comfortably manage on her own once she is single. Determined to get proper exercise, she immediately leaps up to a sturdy branch and begins doing vigorous pull-ups in the crisp air. Panting heavily with sweat dripping down her face, she angrily curses this frail barren daughter's body for failing to keep up with her true abilities. Pushing completely past her physical limits, she drops to the ground to start grueling strength training, refusing to let her current weakness hold her back. A young boy tentatively calls out to his mother as he approaches. Ram turns her head in mild surprise to acknowledge Canon's unexpected presence. She silently curses the outrageous Mercure family dynamics, noting that Canon is already 15 while she is merely 20 and her husband Charles is 25. Determined to properly act like a mother, she gently asks if he needs something. Canon hesitates nervously, shifting his gaze downward in quiet contemplation. He earnestly praises her incredible magic from yesterday and apologizes deeply for the rude remarks made by his teacher and friends. Ram beams internally, deeply touched by what a remarkably good child he is. Brushing off the incident with a soft smile, she reassures him that the insults do not bother her at all. She reflects somberly that in this current life she has only ever been insulted and never once received an apology. Canon curiously asks where she learned such incredible magic, prompting her to internally debate mentioning her self-study. Her eyes widen slightly as she wonders if her young adopted son is already growing suspicious of her abilities. Scrambling for an excuse, she fabricates a story about researching magic alone in her room due to a weak body that prevented actual practice. Canon softly accepts her explanation, leaving Ram immensely relieved that her hasty lie seemingly worked. Staring intently at her, Canon softly calls out to his mother once more. His eyes shine with eager anticipation as he asks if she could show him that spectacular magic one more time. Without hesitation, Ram confidently agrees to his heartfelt request. She takes it a step further and cheerfully suggests they try casting the spell together, leaving Canon completely bewildered. Asking for a brief moment, she intensely focuses her gaze to carefully assess his latent magical potential. A knowing smirk crosses her face as she confirms her initial suspicions about his hidden capabilities. She determines his magical flow and knowledge are completely sufficient to handle entirely different elemental attributes. She silently laments the foolish modern belief that a single person can only master one specific attribute and spell. Offering a warm and encouraging smile, she firmly assures him that he is fully capable of doing this. She confidently explains that the fundamental principles remain exactly the same across different magical disciplines. While Canon doubts his ability since even his teacher fails at this, Ram insists they will cleverly adapt the spell to utilize his strongest water attribute. She playfully points out that he came to her room specifically because he secretly wanted her to teach him. Canon gasps softly, his eyes widening in awe at her incredibly sharp intuition. Magical energy crackles intensely as Canon channels his focus and prepares to cast the complex spell. Ram patiently guides his casting process, instructing him to prioritize the mental image and ignore the minor instabilities of dual attributes. A brilliant burst of light flares outward as Canon triumphantly declares his success. She praises his excellent magical distribution and sharp instincts while closely examining the newly projected scenery. Her encouraging smile falters slightly as she bluntly questions his extremely subtle and unique taste in projecting a basic tree and rock. Canon sweats nervously, utterly stunned by his mother's ruthlessly honest critique of his artistic sense. He mentally defends himself, noting how incredibly difficult it is to freely imagine vivid scenery on command. He realizes that a lifetime of rigid combat training left his mind completely blank, forcing him to just picture the Academy's basic training rock. Panting heavily from extreme exhaustion, he humbly admits his crude magic severely lacks the breathtaking beauty and scale of his mother's spell. Staring at the shimmering illusion, he marvels deeply that such wonderful, non-combative magic actually exists. He gazes up at Ram in absolute awe, completely mesmerized by her hidden depths. As she chuckles softly, Canon desperately wonders what kind of incredible entity this woman truly is. Staring at his trembling hands, a surge of profound pride washes over him as he realizes he actually performed the impossible. He bitterly laughs at his own foolishness, remembering how his very first impression dismissed her as a completely useless and harmless woman. Canon reflects silently that his current situation is significantly better than dealing with his ill-natured former mother. He vividly remembers how everything changed completely the day she proudly demonstrated her incredible magic at the Academy. Canon stares pensively into the distance, completely captivated by his new mother's surprisingly warm nature. He marvels deeply at how she cheerfully teaches him and instantly constructs magic perfectly tailored to his abilities. Ram brightly suggests they go out together next time so he can surely gain more beautiful scenery to project. Canon stares blankly in absolute shock, utterly bewildered by her casual suggestion to leave the Academy grounds. He urgently reminds her that unauthorized outings have been strictly forbidden ever since he first arrived. Completely unfazed by the strict rules, Ram confidently declares they will simply use the Countess's authority to obtain permission. Canon internally doubts anyone besides that man possesses real authority but decides against dampening her enthusiastic mood. Suddenly struck by a burning curiosity, Canon raises his finger and eagerly prepares to ask a new question. He politely asks if he may inquire about her earlier magic, which Ram warmly and instantly agrees to. Canon intensely questions what interpretation she based her magic on since her method drastically differs from traditional magical scholars. Ram casually replies that she believes such magic existed 500 years ago, prompting an eager Canon to ask which text she read. Canon's eyes widen in absolute disbelief at the staggering mention of ancient magic from 500 years ago. Ram nervously deflects by claiming she has not seen it in standard history books and perhaps merely imagined reading it. Eager to uncover the truth, Canon passionately insists he would love to deeply study the exact magic books she used. Ram smoothly lies that her parents disposed of the books but confidently promises she remembers everything and can teach him directly. Canon stares in sheer awe, utterly amazed that she supposedly memorized absolutely everything while confined with a weak body. He smiles softly to himself, feeling a profound and genuine admiration for her vast magical knowledge. Ram warmly praises Canon for being incredibly diligent and for mastering complex magic so remarkably quickly. Canon humbly insists his magic remains terribly unstable and capable of projecting only simple scenery like trees and rocks. He solemnly confesses that as the designated heir of the Mercure family, he still feels incredibly immature and lacking. He reveals his painful insecurity that his father does not truly acknowledge him, leaving his heir status dependent solely on his Academy rank. He grimly states that if someone more talented appears, he will be easily replaced due to the ruthless customs of the Mercure family. Ram's expression darkens instantly as she furiously declares that his father is undeniably the absolute worst. She fiercely vows to unleash embarrassing illusion magic on Charles the very next time she sees him to teach him a lesson. Canon panics intensely, terrifyingly recalling that the cold and ruthless head of the Mercure family never holds back against anyone. Watching her scheme confidently, Canon genuinely fears his unpredictable mother might actually attempt to attack the strongest man in family history. Realizing the immense and immediate danger she is putting herself in, Canon frantically cries out to his mother. Ram turns her head abruptly, completely startled by Canon's sudden and desperate shout. A heavy, tense silence instantly hangs in the air as Ram stares back at her visibly terrified adopted son. A sudden, ominous shift in the surrounding atmosphere violently interrupts their quiet courtyard conversation. A sharp rustle of swift movement echoes through the air as a dangerous presence rapidly approaches them. Infuriated by Charles' unreasonable treatment of Canon, Ram stubbornly reaffirms her plan to blast him with an embarrassing illusion spell. Canon frantically yells out a warning to his mother as a sudden figure startles them both. The imposing and terrifyingly silent figure of Charles suddenly materializes directly in front of them. Charles glares down at the pair with a deeply intense and ruthlessly cold expression on his face. Canon stammers out to his mother in sheer terror, completely paralyzed by his father's sudden and overwhelming arrival. Canon nervously attempts to pull his mother away from the extreme danger standing right before them. Ram stands completely unfazed and thoroughly annoyed, silently preparing herself to boldly confront the imposing head of the Mercure family. Approaching with strict authority, Charles firmly orders Ram to attend an upcoming party. Ram stares at the official invitation in utter confusion while questioning why it specifically demands they attend as a couple. Charles calmly explains the king insisted on hosting a castle ceremony to honor his recent subjugation of magical beasts. Dreading the social implications, Ram nervously clutches the invitation and mutters a troubled sigh. Dark memories flood her mind as she recalls never receiving another party invitation after her past disasters. She remembers the agonizing isolation of being thrown into noble gatherings with absolutely zero support or guidance. Panic sets in as she realizes the overwhelming odds of being completely ostracized once again if she attends. Desperately trying to escape the event, she fakes an illness and insists she must skip the problematic gathering. Refusing to accept her flimsy excuse, Charles boldly threatens to carry her around the entire venue himself. Flustered by Canon eavesdropping on their ridiculous argument, Ram frantically demands a divorce while Charles points out her obvious magical energy. Charles abruptly closes the distance between them with an intense and immovable gaze. Staring deeply into her eyes, he smoothly promises to be her proper and unwavering escort this time around. Ram freezes in wide-eyed shock after being completely disarmed by his sudden and unexpected sincerity. Reluctantly yielding to his stubborn persistence, she agrees to go while he playfully ensures she will not run away. A confident and victorious smile spreads across Charles' face as he declares his eager anticipation for the day. Watching from the sidelines, an incredibly awkward Canon wonders in pure bewilderment if his parents always converse like this. Pivoting his sharp attention, Charles suddenly calls out to the nervous eavesdropping boy. He coldly interrogates his son about why he is suddenly slacking off from his crucial academy training. Pressing the issue, he sternly demands to know if Canon can truly manage as the next count with such irresponsible behavior. Ram watches the tense exchange and immediately deduces that the overwhelmed boy likely skipped his rigorous classes. She feels deeply conflicted while silently understanding Charles' harsh expectations and sympathizing with Canon's desperate desire to learn real magic. Unable to handle the suffocating pressure, a gloomy Canon hangs his head and hastily flees the awkward confrontation. Furious at his ruthless parenting, Ram sharply demands to know why Charles drove their son away just to speak with her. Ignoring her fiery anger, Charles intensely questions where she actually learned such advanced magic. Sweating nervously under his piercing stare, Ram stammers her fabricated excuse about being a self-taught and sickly daughter. She desperately weaves a lie about secretly reading magical texts acquired through her father's business in a magic-despising household. Charles fixes her with an incredibly suspicious glare that silently communicates he sees right through her blatant falsehoods. Panicking internally, Ram forcefully changes the dangerous subject by declaring it is her turn to speak. Charles remains perfectly composed while silently waiting for her sudden and aggressive outburst. Stepping forward boldly, she challenges his earlier scolding of Canon despite only observing the academy for a single day. She passionately argues that forcing 15-year-old children into cramped and monotonous training strips away their joy. Charles listens quietly as she fiercely advocates for the crushed spirits of the young academy students. Unmoved by her emotional plea, he coldly states that grueling training is the inescapable duty of the Count Mercure family. He firmly shuts down her idealism by insisting that centuries of deeply ingrained tradition cannot be altered so easily. Breaking his rigid exterior, he surprisingly admits that the playful magic she taught Canon was genuinely impressive. He confesses he had no idea she could wield multiple attributes simultaneously until he reviewed Faye's detailed surveillance report. Lighting up with eager enthusiasm, Ram excitedly explains that trying various magics makes for a far more wonderful lesson than gloomy power adjustments. Charles simply stares at her radiant face while becoming seemingly captivated by her genuine passion for teaching. Reflecting on their shockingly civil debate, Ram realizes this might be the very first time she can actually reason with her stubborn husband. A sudden spark of wild hope ignites within her as she wonders if she can finally negotiate her desperately wanted divorce. Charles intercepts Ram's divorce attempt instantly, prompting her to silently curse his incredibly sharp perception. Ram lets out an exhausted sigh and desperately tries to formulate her next grand escape plan. She suddenly pauses as a look of profound and unexpected confusion crosses her face. She heavily stumbles forward as her weakened physical body completely betrays her. Gripping her chest in sheer shock, Ram realizes her body is suddenly overwhelmed by an intense, sickening weakness. She internally panics while realizing she completely misjudged her current frailness since the previous magic shouldn't have strained her this much. Her vision completely swims as the crushing, unnatural exhaustion finally takes its heavy toll. Before she violently hits the ground, Charles effortlessly swoops in and scoops her up, leaving her utterly bewildered. Furious and embarrassed, she demands he put her down immediately while Charles confidently states he is simply carrying her to her room. Unfazed by her thrashing, Charles smirks and remarks that she seems far more energetic than he initially thought. Ram violently struggles like a caught fish, completely infuriated by this impossibly arrogant and domineering man. Realizing a contest of physical strength is utterly hopeless, Ram stubbornly hopes Charles' fleeting curiosity will eventually bore him into letting her go. She fiercely formulates a plan to firmly demand a divorce the very second his temporary interest fades. Charles sighs in deep exasperation, complaining that she is lost in thought while he personally carries her and noting how cruel her constant divorce demands truly are. He gently announces their arrival, thoroughly annoyed that his supposedly unwell wife keeps aggressively shouting for a divorce at the drop of a hat. Pausing for a brief and unexpected moment, Ram softly and reluctantly mutters a quiet word of sincere gratitude. Her eyes dart around wildly as she suddenly realizes this unfamiliar, opulent space is definitively not her own room. Panicking as he gently sets her down, Ram frantically stammers that she is feeling much better and immediately attempts to flee. The arrogant and haughty Charles suddenly corners her with an incredibly intense and dangerously unreadable expression. He swiftly pins her down against the plush bedsheets in a completely overwhelming and dominating maneuver. Ram freezes in absolute, mind-numbing terror as Charles' imposing frame traps her completely. He leans in dangerously close, effectively cutting off any possible avenue of physical escape. Charles stares deeply into her terrified eyes, his intense and unwavering gaze silently speaking absolute volumes. Ram stammers entirely incoherently, her face flushing a deep crimson as panic completely short-circuits her rational thoughts. Smirking at her absolute panic, Charles playfully questions what exactly happened to all of her previous fiery bravado. Ram fiercely turns her head away and huffs indignantly, desperately trying to hide her overwhelming and crippling embarrassment. Charles softly calls out to her, his previously commanding tone shifting into something surprisingly and dangerously gentle. Ram furiously reminds herself that in her past life she was an unmatched and legendary great magician who bowed to no one. Charles bluntly states he isn't an insensitive clod who can casually fall asleep with his beautiful wife lying right beside him. Ram coldly calculates that she could easily blast him away and escape this compromising situation with a single, well-placed spell. She violently hesitates, her incredibly powerful magical instincts utterly paralyzed by the sheer, unprecedented physical proximity. Completely overwhelmed by having zero romantic experience in both of her lives, Ram mentally waves a desperate white flag and abruptly passes out. Her body goes completely limp as the sheer mental and emotional overload forces her directly into a deep unconsciousness. Charles simply stares down at his abruptly unconscious wife in a state of completely stunned silence. Noting her tightly furrowed brows, he realizes with utter disbelief that she actually fainted from the sheer, suffocating tension. Stepping back, he admits he never had much interest in women and acknowledges that forcing her down on a whim was completely unlike his usual self. He bitterly reflects on his horrific previous wife, who spent money freely, had endless affairs, and was ultimately stabbed to death by a servant in a tragic love triangle. Remembering the disgraceful scandal they covered up as a mere illness, Charles notes he had enough of wives, but his rigid position strictly demanded he take one. He darkly recalls how Ram was conveniently and coldly invited to this sprawling estate simply to silently fill that mandatory political role. He originally thought Ram Ivor was just a faint-presenced baron's daughter sold by her family, but Faye's recent reports completely shattered that boring illusion. Faye enthusiastically reports that the Mistress flawlessly controlled light, water, and wind to conjure an expansive blue sky and vibrant grasslands for the entire classroom. Charles listens intently as his subordinate confirms that the Countess can incredibly wield multiple powerful types of magic at once. The grim report continues by revealing the cruel former maids prevented her from seeing Cannon while secretly feeding her garbage and selling off her royal dresses. Charles realizes with dark frustration that his wife suffered far worse and colder mistreatment than he originally heard directly from her. He assumes the previously gentle-natured mistress finally reached her absolute breaking point, perfectly explaining her sudden and fiery change in behavior. Narrowing his sharp eyes in deep contemplation, Charles questions if her sudden magical awakening and rebellious attitude are truly that simple. He intensely reflects that there is an undeniable and mysterious aura surrounding Ram that completely defies such basic logical explanations. Feeling a fierce excitement akin to a bloody battlefield, Charles confidently decides that the more she fiercely resists him, the more entirely impossible a divorce becomes. He casually rationalizes that forcing himself onto an unresponsive or fainting woman offers absolutely zero thrill anyway. Staring into the quiet room, the ruthless Count firmly reasserts his absolute lack of intention to ever father his own biological children. He bitterly recalls the horrific succession troubles of his own youth, vowing never to repeat those dark and bloody mistakes. Charles gazes quietly at his deeply slumbering wife, observing her surprisingly peaceful expression as she rests undisturbed. The normally cold and untouchable head of the Mercure family remains silently anchored beside her resting form. Ram softly groans in her deep sleep, quietly mumbling incoherent words about dull memories while tossing gently on the bed. A rare and unreadable emotion flashes across Charles' hardened face as he closely listens to her soft and unguarded sleep-talking. He calmly acknowledges that Ram naturally despises him for his past cold behavior, easily dismissing her restless and frustrated muttering. He genuinely admires how the newly awakened Ram now fearlessly faces him directly and boldly states her unfiltered opinions. Charles marvels at how effortlessly she surprises the level-headed Faye, restores Cannon's lost smile, and breathes a fresh wind of life into the stagnant mansion. Watching her peaceful face softly glowing in the dim light, a profound sense of dangerous hope begins taking root in his mind. He dares to wonder if this remarkable woman might actually possess the incredible power to completely change the blood-soaked destiny of the Mercure family. On the chaotic day of the grand party, Ram patiently assures the bustling maids that she feels perfectly fine while they meticulously adjust her attire. Staring at her stunning reflection, Ram nervously realizes this is the absolute first time she has ever dressed up so extravagantly. She admires the flawlessly fitted and slightly flashy dress, completely amazed that Charles personally arranged the entire luxurious ensemble just for her. Ram feels a sudden flutter of surprise upon remembering how Charles actually came himself to ensure she properly received his grand gift. Charles abruptly interrupts her scattered thoughts by appearing in the doorway and smoothly asking if she is fully ready to depart. Extending his hand with quiet authority, he firmly commands her to follow him to the royal castle. Ram briefly hesitates, her heart racing uncontrollably as she nervously looks up at her incredibly handsome and imposing husband. Gathering her fragmented courage, she elegantly steps forward in her stunning gown to dutifully close the distance between them. She firmly crosses her arms and confidently assures him that he doesn't need to worry because she has no intention of running away. Without a single word of warning, Charles swiftly reaches out and tightly grasps her delicate hand in his firm grip. The sudden and intense physical contact completely shatters her composed exterior as their hands lock securely together. Flashing a devastatingly confident smirk, Charles smoothly reminds his deeply flustered wife that he explicitly promised to be her proper escort.